David, I want to go a bit deeper with you for a second and talk about your plane crash in 2000 and kind of what happened in the aftermath of that.
Yeah, so when I think about it, there's two sort of things that stand out. There's the tragedy of the accident itself and the loss of life. You know, the pilot and the co-pilot sadly were killed, and very aware of the fact that they had wives and children and they weren't coming home that day. And there's the other life learning for me personally, and is that I wasn't responsible for the crash. I was just a passenger along with my girlfriend at the time and my trainer, Andy Matthews. What was the sort of stimulus for getting on that aircraft? I was in London, the plane that I had booked for travelling back to the south of France. I woke up, wanted to go earlier, that aircraft wasn't available, so I asked my office to find me an earlier charter. Said, we've got an aircraft that can fly from Farnborough at that time. So I turned up, met the pilots. The aircraft was owned by David Murray, who at a certain point owned both Glasgow Rangers and Glasgow Celtic. And it had a Scottish flag on the tail fin. And I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of fun, I'm Scottish and there's a Scottish flag. And then we took off, and then an hour later there was an engine failure. And then...
Did you hear something? Or was
the left side engine, I could hear the bearings, and then eventually the engine failed. And then you go into a procedure for nearest airfield to do an emergency landing, and a single engine landing is something that pilots train and practice for. As we came into Lyon, which was the nearest airfield, so we did the sort of rerouting for about half an hour, came in towards Lyon, and I remember we were just, trees in the distance, just at the sort of height of the trees. A minute later or less, the aircraft is rotating, touching the wing, coming onto the fuselage. Sadly, the fuselage was removed, and that's where the pilots were, of course, or the nose of the aircraft, and then came to a halt on the grass, and that was it. The crash was over, and my girlfriend had sustained cracked ribs because of the seatbelt. I had cracked ribs because of the seatbelt. Andy was facing backwards, so he was secure against the seat. The door was completely mangled, so we had to climb out the front. And then we walk away from the aircraft very quickly.
Yeah, because you weren't sure if it was,
Well, there was a small fire on the right side.
Right, okay.
And then we're just standing there. You're waiting for emergency services to come because they're not expecting you to crash. So, although they're on standby, and the first thing the policeman asked me was for our passports.
You're like, really? It's in the plane, mate?
In the aircraft. I didn't stop to pick up my passport on the way out. So it's a slightly bizarre circumstance where you're dealing with your own, okay, how do we now continue our journey?
Yeah.
With also, on the other part of your mind, there's a family, or there's two families that are going to get a phone call which is going to change their life forever. And that was the thing that was a little bit conflicting in my mind, because the rest of the day, I got driven back to Monaco, I got home. I remember lying in bed and sort of having a shiver. That was the first time.
Just being like, I've dodged a bullet here.
Yeah, absolutely. Today could have been the last day of my life. So it triggered a change in my attitude. I couldn't change the fact that people had lost their lives. I could only make decisions for the future of my own life. And the question was, do I want to race? And I'd cracked ribs, and that was uncomfortable. It's not the end of the world, but I did want to race. I'm of a generation where even if you were sick, you get in the car. That's why when I'm doing commentary today, if a driver takes a weekend off because he's got a flu, I struggle with it personally, because if you're a soldier on the front line, you can't say, can we delay the battle today? I want to have a lie-in. You just have to get on with it.